Welcome to this explainer. All right, let's jump right into this. Because today we're looking at the incredible diplomatic whiplash surrounding a massive, rapidly unraveling agreement between the US and Iran. We all know international diplomacy can usually feel pretty slow, highly bureaucratic. But what we've witnessed over the last few hours, it is a dizzying crash from the brink of a historic signing ceremony right back down to angry recriminations. So we're going to map out exactly what happened, what both sides are actually claiming, and how a key ally was left entirely in the dark. To really wrap our heads around this chaos, we've got to start with this absolutely explosive moment. Literally within hours of an apparent diplomatic breakthrough, President Trump took to social media to absolutely blast Iran's version of the agreement. I mean, he didn't mince words. He called Iran dishonorable for what he claimed were highly inaccurate descriptions of the deal. He slammed their response as a weak, pathetic statement and demanded they get their act together fast. It was an incredibly public, fiery rejection of what was supposed to be a done deal. Section 1. Anatomy of a breakdown, from C-17s to social media chaos. Let's trace exactly how this supposedly came together and then just instantly fell apart. The sequence of events here brilliantly illustrates the sheer speed of this collapse. Just yesterday, the message the White House got from mediators and Iranian negotiators was that everyone was essentially ready to sign. The US was so incredibly confident that they literally put planes in the air. 4 U.S. Air Force C-17s left Washington for Europe as an advance team for Vice President Vance, who was headed to Geneva to sign this agreement with the Iranian parliament speaker. But then, this morning, Iranian state media broadcasts their version of the deal, and moments later, the whole thing grinds to a halt with the president's furious social media post. Section 2. Two competing narratives. The Rashomon effect. So why did the president react so strongly? Why were those planes basically flying for nothing? Well, we have to look directly at the conflicting terms being reported. We are dealing with a classic Rashomon effect here, two completely disparate realities of the exact same event. What the US thought they were signing and what Iran told its people they were signing barely even resemble the same document. Let's look at what's actually in dispute. When we break down the terms, the conflict is glaringly obvious. Based on a briefing from a US diplomat, the US claimed the Strait of Hormuz would be opened immediately, with pre-war traffic resuming within 30 days. But on the Iranian side, state media explicitly stated they absolutely would not commit to ceding control over the strait. And on the ceasefire itself, the US believed they had a comprehensive 60-day agreement locked in, while the Iranians claimed the text still needed further review. And then there's this: $24 billion. According to Iranian state media broadcasts, this proposed agreement would demand the release of $24 billion in frozen Iranian funds. Now, these frozen assets have been a massive, massive point of contention, so claiming this giant payout was part of the deal was basically guaranteed to anger the US president, who immediately countered that the leaked terms had absolutely no relation to what was actually agreed upon in writing. On the flip side, the US diplomat's briefing painted a picture of a sweeping, monumental victory, a 60-day ceasefire covering everything, including Lebanon, the lifting of the US blockade on ports, the opening up of some Iranian sanctions, and critically, it supposedly satisfied all US requirements on the nuclear issue. I mean, from that angle, it looked like a total breakthrough. But Iran essentially took a bucket of ice-cold water and threw it over all that optimism. By saying, quote, "The text still requires review and finalization," they completely torpedoed the US narrative that this agreement was ready for signatures in Geneva over the weekend. Section 3. Playing to the audience. The politics of spin. You've got to ask yourself, how can choose sides on the absolute verge of a historic deal be telling the world completely different stories? Well, Axios Global Affairs correspondent Brock Ravid points out that this is actually a classic, deeply ingrained diplomatic phenomenon. Whenever parties get this close to a major deal, both sides suddenly feel immense pressure to market that deal to their own domestic audiences. So they spin it. They loudly emphasize every single thing they're gaining, and they quietly downplay or entirely omit the painful concessions they had to make. So what we're really watching here is a high-stakes PR battle playing out in real time. And because this is such a recognized dynamic, there's a surprising twist. Despite this highly aggressive public collapse, US mediators actually remain cautiously optimistic. From their perspective, this incredibly public clash might not be the death of the agreement at all. It could just be a dramatic negotiation tactic, a temporary hiccup before everyone sits down and actually signs the thing. Section 4. The Israeli wildcard, a social media surprise.
Now, we have to talk about the third major player in this geopolitical puzzle, because their situation completely complicates the narrative: Israel. Given the historically tight alliance between the US and Israel, especially when dealing with a mutual adversary like Iran, you'd naturally assume Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was heavily in the loop on this impending ceasefire, right? Well, the reality is actually quite shocking.
Astonishingly, the US did not notify Israel in advance. Netanyahu wasn't briefed by the White House, he wasn't briefed by the State Department. He literally found out that a massive regional ceasefire was supposedly happening when he read the president's post about the deal online.
I mean, just picture the tension in this room for a second. According to reporting, Netanyahu is sitting down with his security chief, actively discussing strategy for potential US military strikes that were anticipated to happen just hours later. And right in the middle of that war planning session, an advisor walks in and announces the strikes are off, because according to social media, a peace deal had just been struck. In a follow-up phone call with Trump, Netanyahu reportedly acknowledged there was just nothing he could do about the agreement. And that military context, absolutely crucial. Just a day prior, Trump had publicly threatened massive escalation, talking about US troops potentially taking over Iran's critically important Karg Island. But here's the thing. Analysts noted that despite that severe public rhetoric, there was no actual imminent operational plan to start an all-out war or take over the island. The public threats were severe, for sure, but the behind-the-scenes reality was entirely focused on pushing this deal across the finish line. Section 5. What happens next? The brink of war or peace? So, after all of that, the secret flights, the social media bombs, the back-and-forth diplomacy, where does the Middle East actually stand right now? Well, the dust is settling on a stalled deal. Those conflicting domestic narratives put a massive pause on all the momentum. Yet, those US mediators are still holding on to hope for a signing ceremony. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who fundamentally believes the Iranian regime needs to be weakened, not granted sanctions relief, is reportedly in a much better mood now that the deal seems to be collapsing. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. Are we witnessing the genuine, spectacular collapse of a historic agreement? Or, in the incredibly high-stress world of international diplomacy, are the loudest, most public breakdowns simply a necessary smokescreen for the quiet, consequential work that's still happening behind closed doors? We'll definitely be watching the skies and the social media feeds to find out. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll catch you in the next one.